Hi everyone, welcome to DVO206, Lessons from a CISO, how to securely scale your teams, workloads, and budgets. My name is Adam Boyle, I'm the Director of Product Management for Cloud Workload Security at Trend Micro, and joining me today are Jim Hoover, the Chief Information Security Officer of Infor, and Matt Yanchishin at AWS, who is a Senior Solutions Architect Leader. So, what are you going to get away from this session today? Well, we're going to go through the real-life journey of Jim and his team at Infor on how they went from securing a large-scale data center, taking that journey to the AWS cloud, and how they're doing large-scale security today in the AWS cloud. And from that, there's going to be three takeaways. The first one, you're going to learn how to scale security in the AWS cloud. As well, Matt's going to be sharing some of the AWS best practices for large security. The second thing is you're going to learn how to level up your security operations teams. It's overwhelming for security operations teams to also learn cloud. We have the cookbook here to share with you, and Jim's going to be sharing that journey of his team on how they became cloud-savvy security professionals. And then lastly, you're going to learn about how your CXOs have unprecedented visibility into their business in terms of procurement, security, IT, costs, compliance, and governance. This is really, really interesting. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jim Hoover, the Chief Information Security Officer of Infor. Jim has over 30 years experience in the information technology field, including 15 years experience in cybersecurity. His corporate experience includes numerous Fortune 50 and global corporations, as well as the U.S. Department of Defense. His expertise and leadership across compliance activities have been exceptionally appropriate in maturing the Infor Cloud Suite business. Jim proudly served his country with honor as a decorated officer in the United States Air Force. He is a certified information systems security professional as well as a certified information security manager. He is also certified in the foundations of the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, ITIL. Jim earned his Master's of Science in Computer Science from the University of Texas at San Antonio and his Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Arizona State University. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you here today, and we look forward to hearing your experiences moving to the cloud.
Thank you, Adam.
So Jim, tell us a little bit about Infor.
Well, Infor is a global enterprise software company. We have about almost 75,000 different customers. We have those customers are in 200 different countries and provinces throughout the world and territories. And Infor strives to be in the top 75 to 85%, all the way up to 100% of large companies participating in industries. And here's a dozen of those industries. There we go. A dozen of the industries showing up on the screen. And you can see we're meeting our goal in all of these industries. It's amazing the growth of Infor in the last 5 years.
Yeah, clearly there's a lot of breadth and depth in many industries globally. So perhaps, Jim, you can now tell us a little bit about Infor in the AWS cloud. There's some serious scale here.
Sure. So in the cloud, we have 3,500 customers, a little bit more than that, actually. Of those, they've provisioned 45 million users. And those users are accessing the environments from 6,300 different sites throughout the world. I think it shows just how what a great job AWS has done making their systems available worldwide.
Wow, having that much in the AWS cloud as a CISO, and you have to protect all that, that's quite a big responsibility. All right, let's move our discussion into large-scale architecture and technology. We're going to take the journey from the data center to the AWS cloud. Let's start with Jim, in the data center, what were your top data center challenges for large-scale security?
Well, in the data center, we have lots of different groups, and they're all using lots of different tools. And unfortunately, a lot of those tools are purposefully built and not speaking the same language. So it's difficult for one group, to leverage the tools being experienced by the other groups. In addition to that, you have the typical colos or data center issues where you got to order hardware, you have to wait for it to come in, you have to find a place for it in the rack, put it in the rack, install it, and manage that environment. And remember who's using what. A lot of these data centers have been around a long time. We had a customer, actually I was a consultant for a corporation a few years back, and we were in the data center trying to reroute things and upgrade the information or upgrade the material. A couple of the pieces of hardware we couldn't find the owner for. We just absolutely could not find who owned that system. And we finally decided we're going to pull the plug and see if anybody complains. They did, and so we found out who the owner was. But it just shows that these things can grow and get out of control very easily.
Well, that's clearly a big challenge. Lots of different groups, lots of different tools, none of this speaking the same language. It must be really difficult to scale in the data center and have that visibility that you need. So Infor makes a decision to boldly move to the cloud. You're faced with, okay, how am I going to protect all this stuff? What were your top of mind concerns going into this journey of moving to the cloud?
Well, I had a lot of concerns, and it reminded me of Ronald Reagan. There's a few of us in this audience old enough to remember the Cold War, and Ronald Reagan had a Russian proverb he liked to repeat to Gorbachev, and it was always, trust but verify. And that was what I was confronted with. How am I going to trust the environment that I choose but verify it? And I had to make sure this organization would have the right controls, security controls in place, meeting best practices. ISO 27001 is one of those, NIST 853 is another. I had to also ensure that they had the right tools, not only the right tools for them, but the tools that they were using could move up to the next layer, which was Infor's management of the operational environment. And we could utilize those tools. And then finally, we had the huge concern of compliance, and especially with Safe Harbor being struck down 2 days ago on Tuesday. The compliance is still a major issue and continues to be that way. And I did not want my team to have to worry about making sure the infrastructure at the lowest level, hypervisor level, the physical infrastructure, was meeting the compliance requirements.
Well, that's great. So I'm sure there's some folks here in the audience who would share these same concerns. Security controls, what's the parity? What are they? Tools, what tools do I use? What does my security stack look like? And how do I achieve compliance on all these different frameworks? Why don't we now move to how you addressed these three concerns, security controls, tools, and compliance. Why don't you walk us through the Infor security stack?
Okay, well, we did a lot of research before we made decisions on how to move forward. And of course, AWS was our baseline, our infrastructure that we chose. We're really happy we did that. The automation that AWS provides actually forced standards among all these different tools and all the different people, so products could speak the same language. We chose Trend Micro Deep Security as our choice protecting the host. And the advantage of Trend Micro Deep Security is it brings multiple tools into one. The anti-malware, the firewall, the host-based intrusion protection, the reputational aspects of it. So we're really happy of choosing Trend Micro Deep Security. And it gives us one pane of glass. It's amazing that in a data center, you didn't know, or even in a corporate environment, it's hard to tell if someone set up a server underneath their desk to try to have rogue IT or in the closet. In AWS, someone stands that server up, Trend Micro Deep Security puts that on the portal right in front of me, so I can say it's a new system, it's not managed by Trend Micro, we need to put something in place to manage that. It really helps with the visibility. Then we had to do something with the logs. We get tons of logs, we got to do something with them, got to get them off of the network, make them immutable, that our choice was Sumo Logic in that environment. And that's turned out to be quite well a great choice because our security teams can manage it, utilize it, and all the other operations teams use it too. So we were able to leverage the experience we built with that tool. Then we had to have an ITIL-based mechanism to do service management. We chose ServiceNow, arguably one of the best in ITIL-based mechanisms, and we like it because it's extendable.
Right.
We can reach into different into different areas, pull information, and automatically create tickets when we need to, send out emails, et cetera. So all that brings together a really mature stack for us to implement security and manage the AWS environment.
Okay, so that sounds like it's addressed 2 of your 3 concerns, security controls and the tool choices. But you haven't yet told us about compliance. How does this stack help you address your concern around compliance?
Well, first off, at the lowest level, Amazon is amazing on the number of certifications and attestations they have. If you can come up with a compliance or regulatory requirement, they've already got that certification. It really helps us. And really, our auditors really appreciate it because we can define the scope of our audits to just be our environment that we're managing. And when the auditors are asking about the infrastructure, we can rely upon AWS's attestations from their auditors to do that. They have probably the best in class of meeting those certifications. And then we were able to build upon that to get our ITAR and our HIPAA attestations, and we're moving toward FedRAMP certification.
Well, that's fantastic. In some of our conversations, I think everyone here knows shared responsibility, but you felt it was particularly important to talk about that today with our audience and how it's important to you and your customers.
Yeah, shared responsibility model is very important, and it's amazing how many customers of ours don't quite understand that and are quite nervous about it. Even if they understand it, they're nervous about the responsibility model. They're concerned that we're going to pass off everything to Amazon. It is true that Amazon is responsible for the infrastructure, and we hold them to that. We manage that relationship. Our customers have one hand to shake, and that's Infor. And they really appreciate that fact. And of course, it's always reflected in the contracts too. So, and we always remind the customers, they have a responsibility too. They have to provision their users. And when a user leaves, they have to deprovision them. They get to establish the application and configure it in a way that matches their security policies. So we're all in this together, but it's the handshake between us and our customer that works really strongly.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, thanks for that, Jim, for walking us through your security stack. Let's move to Matt. Now, Matt, could you please share with the audience what you feel would be some great best practices in terms of rolling out large-scale security?
Sure. So I've worked for years now with Infor and a lot of enterprises out there, both partners and AWS customers. And there's really 3 things that, for me that stick out. The first thing is I really believe strongly in the principle of least privilege. And one way to enforce that is to segment your network environment, and it's something we take for granted now. The second is really controlling access and segregating privilege on the identity level. So being able to really who can do what, when, where, and how. And the third thing that is really increasingly becoming important, especially as the technology advances in this space, is monitoring for things that aren't normal, for anomalous behavior. So
right.
Those are 3 areas that are the most important, I think.
Well, it'd be great. Why don't you walk us through those a little bit?
Sure. So the first one, again, getting back to that principle of least privilege, that applies to both people and machines. And so we have the VPC, the virtual private cloud, and by association, there's security groups, and you can basically get really granular around project level or team level, or even account level if you have a multi-tenant environment, and be very strict and fine-grained about who can talk to what applications can talk to other applications. And being able to separate this allows you to both get efficiencies of scale, because you can run multiple applications in one VPC, for example, but it also allows you to have really tight, fine-grained control that you can proactively monitor, to Jim's point earlier, so that if something is out of compliance and out of norm and is talking to something or someone it shouldn't, you can rein it back in really quickly. So the second is really identity. We have identity and access management service and a lot of associated services. And being able to have fine-grained control, not just at the network perimeter and the network layer, but also in terms of the API access.
Right.
So be able to segregate, actually Infor does this really well. The way they handle operations is they kind of have very fine-grained control. Okay, you're the operations guy for storage, for example, or for X. You should only be able to manipulate those services that are directly related to storage, for example. So restricting human access, being very fine-grained about once you get access, what you can do, and making it hard to get access. Not hard operationally, but you need to have the right credentials, multi-factor authentication. The gate needs to be well locked.
Great. And how about your third one?
This is my favorite, actually. I'm really into security, and I'm also into analytics. And we have a number of services like CloudTrail. This is amazing. Jim talked about this earlier. In a data center, imagine in a data center 5 years ago, if you could know every single operation to every single server to manipulate the infrastructure. That was like a pipe dream. And now you can have CloudTrail when anybody updates a firewall rule, whenever anyone provisions a server, it's all logged. So it's an auditor's dream and also a security person's dream, because if a server is provisioned or a security group rule is changed and say you're HIPAA compliant, and suddenly that makes you not HIPAA compliant by making that change, you need to know that. And again, you need to be able to rein back in. And also security-wise, vulnerabilities, 0-day vulnerabilities, it's now 0-minute vulnerabilities, and often you don't know what that vulnerability is. And so be able to look for things that are weird, things that are out of, not normal, is really crucial. And so this is where config comes in when things go out of band. CloudWatch, you're just looking for a spike in CPU for a server that's been 50% CPU its whole life, and it goes to 100% all of a sudden. Something's up. You don't necessarily need to know what's up. You just want to shut it down and figure it out. And the last one that I always tell people they forget about is money. So, if your bill suddenly spikes hour over hour, that could be something doing someone malicious inside your account. You better pay attention.
That's great. Well, thanks very much, Matt, for that. All right, let's move our discussion to people, the security operations team, and let's walk through that journey of your security operations team in a data center, managing many, many applications. What did Infor do? What were their biggest challenges in that journey moving to the AWS cloud? And what does that cloud security team look like now in the AWS? And what are some of the net benefits that Infor has seen? So Jim, for you and your team, the folks that are responsible for protecting the environment, what were the biggest challenges for them in the data center?
Well, our team is relatively small for a security team, and it's dealing with many different application teams at Infor and many different operational teams, et cetera. And there even goes to the corporate environment, because my team's responsible for the corporate environment as well as the cloud environment. So we have so many siloed communications happening within those teams, or we had so many siloed communications happening within those teams, that my team would end up repeating themselves, slight nuances because of the unique requirements by the teams, but they were still repeating themselves with some of the requirements. We couldn't have a single policy, we couldn't have a single standards, we couldn't have a single wiki where people could go to. There were lots of exceptions. And it's not the fault of the teams, it's the business requirements were driving the exceptions. And because of the lack of flexibility of some of the data center capabilities, we were unable to manage those exceptions better. So we ended up with just a lot of additional activity and a lot of thrash.
Okay, I think I get that. So there's a lot of the same conversation happening over and over with each application team, and it's done differently. And you're doing this over and over. I can feel the inefficiency with that and the impact to your overall visibility of your security posture. That's definitely a big challenge. Mm-hmm. So why don't we talk a little bit about this security operations team that's dealing with many tools, many application teams. Now they have to go to the cloud. Oh geez, a whole nother set of new things to learn. What were their top of mind concerns in this journey moving to the cloud?
Well, they were extremely concerned because we're going from a physical data center to a virtual data center. And the concepts are completely different, and the automation is completely different. So now they were really feeling like they were not prepared to meet that challenge because they were already stretched pretty thin.
Right.
Fortunately, we have a strong single tenant group that's been working with AWS for many years, probably 5 or 6 years, I believe. And then we have a multi-tenant group made up of incredibly technical individuals that grasp these concepts quite quickly. The great news here, everyone's speaking the same language. So when the single tenant guys would explain something to my team, or the multi-tenant teams would explain it, my guys could absorb that, understand what was going on, and apply it to their
So how did they
environment.
go about learning the cloud?
They did a couple ways. Sometimes they would ask their peers, but often, being a nice virtual environment where you can stand it up and actually work on it, they would just stand up an environment, learn by doing, work with
Learn by
it,
execution.
load some tools, understand the portal. If they had some issues with some of the tools, they would contact experts like at Trend Micro Deep Security. Your guys work through that. And they just, is a learn by doing and attending conferences like this one. It's just a fantastic environment.
Fail forward fast, just try. It's kind of like nobody reads a book anymore on how to ride a bike. They just get on and start riding that bike. And through that journey, that's how they develop their skill set.
Right.
That's pretty cool. So Matt, how does a security operations team in the data center today bootstrap themselves? What resources does AWS have? Actually, we'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about what your security operations team looks like in the cloud now, Jim.
Yep. Well, now that we've got this visibility with tools like Trend Micro Deep Security, and we're all speaking the same language, same automation, our teams can have one standard, one set of policies, one set of directions to the teams, and it's posted in one place on a wiki, and everyone follows that. And actually, what we're finding is in AWS, security is such an integral part of AWS and built into so many tools, our teams now think securely. And so when they implement something, it's probably done securely. And now my team is more of a strategic level, adding value and going up the value chain and becoming part of the inner circle being brought in to make strategic decisions.
That's great. That's really good to hear. And did you see a reduction in tools?
Actually, we did. And Trend Micro Deep Security is one of those. You know, it went from 4 or 5 different tools doing all these different services on the system to one. And what's the best part about that is you get one portal to look at. I look at that portal, I look at the report, it gets generated weekly. I can see who provisioned a server without Trend Micro Deep Security on it and delve into it and ask them why they did that. And it's amazing. No more rogue IT like we had it in the corporate environment. No one trying to put something underneath the desk and hide it. They can't hide now.
Cool. All right, let's go back to Matt for a second here. So that question I was asking earlier about bootstrapping a security operations team, there's a ton of resources at AWS for anyone to go and consume. What would you guide people on doing, Matt, in terms of aggressively learning the cloud in terms of security?
Well, I actually love 2 things that Jim just said. You know, the first one is just do it.
Yeah.
It used to be you couldn't really get a whole data center to learn on, and now you can spin up sort of a sandbox environment or a demo environment and just get your team to learn. The second thing I love is getting your teams to think security. So you have security operations teams, but suddenly now your DevOps team is also your security team, your analytics team is your security team, and really getting those people to think in an AWS-specific way about security. So I always say that moving from the data center to AWS is less of a change than you think it's going to be, but you can extend and enhance your security posture by using AWS-specific security features. And then by association, using ISVs that are sort of built with AWS in mind or work for AWS and use the services like Trend Micro Deep Security, that really allows you to become very fine-grained to take advantage of some of the things I talked about earlier that make AWS an even better place for security, to increase your security posture by moving to the cloud. So the second thing is analytics. Security and analytics are this merging world. So I mentioned before, vulnerabilities, being able to analyze your logs at scale. If you have 10,000 servers, it's a big data problem to analyze your logs. You need to know how to run a Hadoop cluster or a data warehouse and derive value in analytics and security information out of those logs. So analytics, understanding Hadoop, understanding data warehousing. And the last one is sort of a new term we're trying to throw around here at AWS that I love. It's called DevSecOps. I mentioned, for example, like the 0-day vulnerability. Well, how do you respond to that?
Right.
Like you find it, are you going to shut down your server? No, you can't take down your business, right? You need to get a patch out there. You need to get a new server out there. You need to get a new version of your software. So the ability to quickly respond to threats or to just respond in general. We all have continuous integration pipelines, or I hope we do now. But we need to extend that to security. So security engineers need to be DevOps engineers a lot of the time. They need to be able to help the DevOps teams respond to security events in real time as they happen.
I get it, DevOps aware. That sounds very important in today's times. Definitely working in AWS. Okay, let's move to CXO visibility. True business impact. You know, the leaders of your companies, what improved visibility will they have when they move to the cloud? And let's walk through what that means for a CISO, a CIO, a COO, and a CFO. Let's start with you, Jim, the CISO. What was your biggest improvement in terms of visibility after moving to the cloud?
Well, and it's almost redundant, but it's really the ability to see into the account, to really see what's being provisioned, to understand what's being effectively managed, what isn't being effectively managed, how to have a policy that's defined, that's appropriate for all of these systems, how to make sure everyone's speaking the same language and utilizing similar tools. It's just been a huge boon to us. And as Matt just said, with DevSecOps, our teams are now becoming more refined and able to be more agile on creating tools that can respond more quickly. You know, it used to be, you'd get an attack and it'd take you 48 hours to kind of figure out what you're going to do about it. Right. And sometimes the first thing you do is just go disconnect the Ethernet cable so it can no longer communicate. And now, instead of that calling up the guy who was at the data center to go do that, it's an automated function where and AWS keeps coming out with better tools on a regular basis.
And you've also talked about the teams, the way they were collaborating on the data center and how that is now. Can you explain what that benefit's been?
That's great. Yeah, our security team is now being brought into the table. They're a trusted member of the decisions being made, and basically you're part of the inner circle. Sometimes security was kind of thought of as an inhibitor, sometimes not brought in either on purpose or maybe just because a decision was made that had security ramifications that no one understood.
Right.
But not anymore. They understand security is built into the environment, how important it is, and they know we're not going to put a hold or a stop to anything. We can make
That's really
decisions.
cool. So in the data center, they were more of a passenger, and now in the cloud, they're sitting up front with the cloud operations team, helping steer cloud operations effectiveness. That's a really cool cultural shift.
Pretty close. Maybe a passenger or maybe shoved into the trunk and kept in.
That's great. Now, how about the CIO? What's been the biggest improvement in terms of visibility for the CIO?
Well, I think CIOs can really benefit with AWS. This gives them the ability to do network segmentation at an incredible level and to be able to respond more quickly than they've ever been able to respond before. Before, in a data center, you'd have maybe a very sensitive application that needs to be stood up utilizing sensitive data, and you had to protect it very well. It would take a lot of planning, a lot of research, and a lot of additional firewall rules to make that segmentation in your data center environment. And unfortunately, guess who was managing that environment? The same guys managing the the corporate network. Well, with AWS segmentation, automatic segmentation, you're pushing that out there, and parts of the operational team now are managing that very strategic, sensitive piece of data, leaving your corporate environment able to do your corporate environment stuff that may be requiring being exposed to the internet more,
right,
getting mail to the managers, et cetera.
And what about rogue IT?
Oh yeah, then that's a great point. No longer can people, actually there's two reasons, no longer do they want to use rogue IT because it's so easy to call IT. They can stand up this system in minutes or hours once it's approved, and you're often using it immediately. And if you do use rogue IT, meaning trying to put something in AWS without approvals, it stands out. It just jumps out at you, and they know to rein that in.
So I guess now that you've moved to AWS, you've seen a reduction of servers under people's desks?
Yes,
that you weren't able to protect? Okay,
absolutely.
That's cool. That's great. So what about the COO in terms of compliance and governance?
Yeah, our COO is responsible for compliance within N4, and that's growing exponentially. It's amazing how much we get audited. Weekly, we're going through a customer audit or an audit by our auditors. And the rhythm and the effectiveness and the efficiencies associated with doing an audit has improved dramatically. Remember, we rely on AWS for their attestations. So ours, as that scope, as I mentioned before, much more restrictive. Auditors can see exactly what's going on with Trend Micro Deep Security or Sumo Logic. They really appreciate that. And literally, we've probably gotten a 3 to 4x improvement in time to get through an audit.
That's pretty impressive. So there's been benefits with your relationships with the auditors and the compliance activities. There's been benefits to moving the audit experience from the data center to the cloud and having a reduced scope of compliance activities because of AWS's compliance baseline, if you will. That's really, really impressive. Now, what about the CFO? I mean, there's so many things the CFO couldn't have seen before. All these assets being bought, what cost center to charge it to, tracking accurate profitability for various business. What has been the biggest improvement for the CFO?
Yeah, a CFO has a difficult challenge, especially when it was back in the data center days. We'd have a lot of legacy equipment being put out there, people forgetting who it was purchased for, why it was there, who to charge it back to, what business was driving it, and tracking profitability of that business.
Right.
So that was all lost before. Well, the CFOs now, using AWS, they get to see exactly the environments that are being stood up for each business. And those businesses now are being held to a higher standard. It's why are you exceeding the budget that you had put in place for last year, and how are you going to deal with it? Well, the great news, AWS allows them to deal with it. They have the ability, and the N4 does this on a regular basis, to tag resources. And those tags can represent when the system can be shut down, who owns it, how often it gets used. And we have a script that runs looking at those tags, and if it's nighttime and it says, shut me down at night, it shuts it down. So we save a lot of money with that capability.
And so the CFO would have also disliked all those servers under the desks and that rogue IT. Has he seen a change in people's behavior?
Oh, yeah,
going to the
actually, yeah.
cloud?
These, and I think you had mentioned it before when we were talking yesterday, these guys have become fiscally responsible. And it's not that they didn't want to be responsible before, they had no way of managing their environment in an effective way. And now they do. It's as simple as running that script. They understand technology, they understand automation, and it gets done really, really well. They just are happy to oblige. And it really helps the CFO.
That's pretty amazing, a cultural shift where before in the data center you have all these business units and application teams going out and buying all kinds of hardware, and so they could meet some market requirements, get to the market as fast as possible, but at the cost of opening up security issues, to now they actually are fiscally responsible. They're actually turning down loads and they're helping the bottom line. That kind of cultural shift, and if that's scaling across all your organizations, that is really impressive, and that's really going to help the margins for sure.
Yep, and we couldn't do it without AWS automation. It just enables that capability.
That's really cool. Okay. Thank you, Jim, very much for walking us through your journey. Let's summarize what we've just learned from Jim. The first thing is simplicity enables scalability. That's a really key theme here. So when you're reducing your tools, when your tools and teams are speaking the same language, when you have data segmentation, you have those AWS large-scale security best practices in place, you are going to be able to have a lot more visibility. Because visibility enables scalability as well. Having that single pane of glass or a few panes of glass where you could holistically see every instance popping out at you and whether it's compliant or not to your security policies is really, really important. The second thing is we've learned about how to take your security operations teams in the data center and make them cloud rock stars, and how they move up the value chain and how they can scale themselves, how they can support more application teams. And how do you do that? Well, you do it by baptism by fire. You throw yourself at it. You learn by doing. You learn by making mistakes. You leverage the resources that AWS has to bring you up to speed on that. And then finally, we've learned about the CXO unprecedented visibility in so many different lenses. Security visibility, IT and procurement visibility, compliance and governance, easier and has that faster rhythm. It's more efficient than ever before. And then finally, the bottom line, the costs, and being able to have this fiscally responsible set of business teams where before they were going out and buying all kinds of stuff and putting it under the desks. Having that now, and all of these officers having visibility of that really, truly has unprecedented visibility. And with that, I'd like to thank Jim and Matt for joining us on stage today. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and thank you all for coming today.